Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to today's Smarter Growth webinar, Challenges with Market Speed with Steve Tracy from Penn State. A few logistics before we get started. All attendees are in listen-only mode, so should you have any issues during the broadcast, please don't hesitate to type a question into the question box and I will assist you on the back end. Today's webinar will be recorded and shared. We'll post it up to onto our website as well as send it out to everyone who signed up. And without further ado, I'd like to pass it off to CorpU's CEO and founder, Alan Todd. Alan.
All right, thank you, Jessica. Welcome everybody to the Smarter Growth series. Our goal in every episode is to unpack some leadership insights that are rooted in management science. And I'm really excited about today's event because we have a blast from the past, Steve Tracy, who we had last May. So it's been a year. We have some exciting he's got a lot of exciting new things to talk about. And ultimately, it's all about market speed and delivering to customers anytime, anywhere. And I think there's nothing more exciting than thinking about how do you build a learning organization that drives speed and agility so you can better serve customers, and how do you do that in supply chain? And we're gonna unpack both of those things. And as I was reflecting on today, I was thinking about Steve and I we're on the back half of a decade of working together, focused on helping supply chain leaders create the future by harnessing collective intelligence. And I looked at the Gartner new top supply chain list. So the new top 25 came out, I don't know, sometime in the last maybe week or so. And we've had the great pleasure of working with 5 of the top 10 and working with a bunch of the top award-winning supply chains, and with Steve and his team at Penn State, some of the great work that they've done and that we've been able to do together. We've been lucky enough to win awards with Chief Learning Officer Magazine and with Supply Chain SCM World with Gartner, the Talent Payback of the Year. So it's been kind of an exciting journey, and I think we have a lot of cool new things. So I thought I'd tee up today's conversation before we get Steve, just to talk about a couple of things to become a learning organization. So a learning organization is an organization where people learn how to learn together to win in the marketplace. So they're using learning to win in the marketplace, learning to win at learning. And it sounds easy and certainly something that people talk about forever, but it's not that easy. So people that in a world where change continues, the rate of change continues to accelerate. And with that rate of change accelerating, if you're not changing the rate of learning in your organization and looking at the rate of learning as the slowest person or the slowest team learning, let's say in a supply chain with all of the functions across the supply chain, when you add that all up together, that's your rate of learning. And if you're not shaping the learning curve, harnessing the collective intelligence, all the people, creating an everyone culture, no one left behind, if you're not driving that, then you're going to be falling behind, because the rate of change will relentlessly pursue or accelerate. It will continue to march forward. And if you don't shape the rate of learning or shape your learning curve, then you can be someone that's climbing the learning curve, following a shaper, or you can be somebody who's watching the learning curve. So you're watching the climbers and the shapers; they're driving the industry forward, and you're watching. So the constraints are behavior change, environment, culture, and I thought I'd just unpack 1 or 2 of these as they're relevant for teeing up Steve for today, because we're talking about supply chain and developing talent and creating the future. And so I guess the first big thing is leaders have to remove the barriers. Organizations, by their nature, are built for predictability. They're not built to learn. They're built for standards and the eradication of variance. And so when you have a system that is relentlessly looking to eradicate variance, it makes it difficult to think about where's the space that we've created to try new things, to experiment. And then individual learning inhibitors, which basically we all walk around, we carry around a big ego and a view of the world, and maybe some people bigger than others, but the bottom line, through evolutionary biology, they've kind of found most of the things that we have in our ego were built to protect us, and worldviews were built to protect us, and we have to break those things down. Successful learning organizations are able to create the conditions and shape the environment for learning. And what leaders do, shapers shape the environment. And these are two of the top behavioral and social psychologists of the 20th century, and I think they're the reason they're famous and worthy. Kurt Lewin, behavior is a function of the person and the environment. So what that means on this left-hand equation is that if you do individual training and you don't change the environment, the learning and the behavior change won't stick. And if you look at Maslow, Maslow says that you have to feel safe enough to dare. So if you're not creating a safe environment in which people feel safe enough to dare, then your rate of learning will always be challenged for every person. So you can't harness collective intelligence unless you think of these two things. And the metaphor I like to use on behavior as a function of the person and the environment is the dirty fish tank. So if you had a dirty fish tank and you took a fish out, sent them away to training, got them all cleaned up, and you put them back a week later in the dirty fish tank, pretty soon, within a couple of weeks, the fish falls back to the old living in a dirty fish tank. So a learning organization is one where every person is scrubbing the fish tank walls every single day. And it's baked into the culture, it's baked into leadership, it's baked into the behaviors, baked into the values. And that's what we mean by shapers shape the environment. And finally, shapers shape structured, they structure dialogue. So dialogue is an active learning method as opposed to passive learning. A passive learning method, for example, would be connecting people to content like read something or watch a video. And there's nothing wrong with passive mediums, but where deep meaning making occurs is in active learning. When we ask people to engage, when we connect people together in purpose-built groups, and we use the content, for instance, a lot of our Supply Chain Leadership Academy content with Steve and the Penn State team, the content is a lens through which we have a conversation about real work, solving problems, generating ideas, teaching and learning from each other, generating new knowledge and amplifying that across the organization. It is that the structure of those environments, if you're not shaping dialogue and active dialogue in a positive, safe environment, then you're not getting active learning. And you'll get passive learning. And is it good? Yeah, it's okay. But will you be a shaper of the learning curve? No chance. So that's kind of the key. And finally, shapers analyze dialogue. So what happens when we get people to engage? So a lot of the programs that we do, Steve and I together with our many customers, they engage in dialogue and you see them, they're learning new concepts. Steve's going to teach us some today, which are really cool. But instead of getting a survey at the end, like I'm ready to give feedback in this chart on the left, you look at the right, we're really looking into the hearts and minds of people. Morale's so low. We have to balance pushing the teams, but we're not very good at that. We need weekly meetings on the big picture. We're struggling to handle the bonus issue. So these are examples of using that thick descriptive data that tells the stories that look into the hearts and minds of the people. And that's where all the difference in the world is made. That's how you create the conditions and shape the environment for organizational learning to cement, for organizational capabilities to get built at a faster pace than your competitors. And people that do that are people who are shaping the learning curve, and they're driving change and they're driving innovation. And we see that learning organization, that is the bedrock foundation, the wellspring from which everything flows. So if you get this right, you build a very winning, successful organization. You harness collective intelligence. So with that, let's do a quick poll. How well does your organization harness collective intelligence? And this is my last slide. We're going to turn it over to Steve. But Steve, I'm going to tee you right up with answers to a poll so we can just see how people think about this topic. So folks, if you can vote right now, you should have that on your screen. I'm going to keep this open for about 25 more seconds. And then I'm going to turn it over to Steve to talk about how to achieve speed in the market, what's going on, and then we'll have a conversation. We'll take some questions. So if you have questions that you're building, please feel free to type them in to the question box. We would love to answer your questions. Okay, I think we're ready to go. And if we could share the results. There we go. So I think it's interesting, 11% very well. So for that group, I would say you are the exemplar group, and then the other 88%, some work to be done to get us there. So thank you for participating in that poll. Without further ado, I would like to turn it over to our guest today, Steve Tracy. Steve?
Hi, Alan. Good afternoon. How are you? And good afternoon to everyone on the line today.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Appreciate your time. Did you think anything about that poll? You surprised, or it's what you expected?
No, well, I was going to say before you posted the results, I was going to chime in and say we're going to get a Poisson distribution, and we did. So no one's going to say not at all, right? Because
Right.
that's a predictable answer. And the preponderance of folks were going to say not well or well, and we would get a small percentage that said very well. And it was perfect Poisson distribution. So it would have been an accurate guess.
Yep, for sure. Thank you for that.
You bet. I like to tie what I'm going to talk about together a little bit with what Alan said before we get started. One is he was talking about the barriers to learning, and the term that I use on the organizational side is organizational inertia. And I'm sure all of you remember your middle school or high school, physics class and understand what inertia is. My colleague calls it organizational entropy because he actually says it goes the other way. He says if you don't continuously improve things over time, they deteriorate. So, and he is a true physicist. So, in terms of the individual side, I'd like to add a little bit of self-awareness here, and that is we talk about our you talk a little bit, Alan, about people's willingness to feel self-validation, and so first I will say is that I stole this quote from another person, but I find it interesting that I am often wrong, but I'm never in doubt. So so just so you understand, anything that I'm telling you today is grounded in research, but it may be completely wrong, and that's okay. If you disagree with me, you're not going to offend me in any way. So please, if anyone on the line or Alan, if you want to jump in with a differing perspective, we love to hear differing perspectives. And the last thing to say is one of my mentors on the academic side taught me something, a very valuable lesson when I was a newly minted college professor, and said that Steve, your job in the classroom is not to prove to everyone that you're smart. He said, first of all, you're not. And he said, second of all, as long as they believe you are, that's okay. So
yeah.
So with that, with those little caveats in mind, again, anybody has any questions, please feel free to stop Alan or myself, raise your hand, and Jessica will punch you in, and we'll get your question asked. So today's topic
beautiful.
is challenges with market speed, and let's start off with the first slide. This is kind of a modified version of what you would know as the SCORE model, which for those of you familiar with that, plan, source, make, deliver, and later, of course, we added return. But we've taken sort of a more of an end-to-end view in the Penn State model to look at it from our customers back all the way back to our suppliers. And of course, even that is not comprehensive, right? Because you may have a supply chain where you have customers and they have customers and they have customers and they have customers, and you may have suppliers that have suppliers that have suppliers that have suppliers. So you can carry this out to the nth degree. But the only point of this model is to identify a couple of things. One is where the dotted lines exist is these are touch points between organizations, and internally in our organization, there are touch points between the various functions within the supply chain, and there are many of those. And the amount of influence that we have on those processes deteriorates as we get further away from our core. But the only way to truly be optimal in the future is to think from an end-to-end perspective. So I tee that up in the sense that this is today's thinking broadly across supply chains globally, is where is the future and where's all the value to be created? And it's by adopting this end-to-end mindset. And as Alan pointed out in the beginning, the only way we can really do that is through organizational learning. So to get everybody on the same page with the same terminology and the same knowledge. And you can do that in a combination of ways. You can partner with universities like Penn State or others. There are many peer institutions like ours. You can partner with learning organizations like CorpU, who also partners with multiple universities. You can do some of it yourself. There is no right formula to this. However, and I'll show you a chart a little bit later. However, there are some myths about that I'd like to dispel. So let's jump right into it. So I want to start with today's challenges. And these are, there are more than 3, of course, today. You could probably come up with a list of 10 or 12, but I think these are 3 of the more interesting themes that are impacting supply chains today. And I'm going to unbundle these a little bit, each one, but they are labor scarcity, market speed, and the ability to adapt and adopt game-changing technologies, of which there are many. So let's jump into the first one, labor scarcity. So why is there labor scarcity? Well, there's a couple of reasons, and I quote, there's some research, in all my slides I quote the sources, so if you want to go look it up. But part of it is there are few, and I'm focusing here on the Americas, but you could broadly, this applies pretty much everywhere in the world, except for a few emerging market countries that are struggling economically. There are more job vacancies than there are people to fill them. Some of that is demographic. Of course, we've got the changing conditions in particularly in the West in terms of aging population, fewer children. Of course, there are restrictions on immigration. That's sort of a political issue that could address some of those issues. And our education systems, both at the university level and prior, have not really adapted quite well to the changing marketplace in terms of labor demand. So there are a lot of things going on there. But if we could jump to the next slide, Alan, we can think about so what does that really mean? Well, it means that since it's difficult to acquire talent, we have to think about how we manage our talent differently. So we have to focus more on recruiting and retention and on education and learning. If you look at the research, what you will find is that the number one reason that typically that an associate leaves his or her employer is because they don't like their boss. Okay, that's pretty common knowledge. But the number in the top three are they don't feel like they're providing value in their position in terms of what it is they're doing, and they don't feel like they have a career path and are being developed. Well, we can address those two, right? The first one's a little stickier, right? And you know, and that's a different management issue. But we can address can I create positions where people are actually adding value? And number three is, can I provide lifelong learning? And I can, right? That's easily doable and readily available to us. So how do we address these repercussions directly? So we jump to the next slide. Here's some effective strategies that we can do to address this talent scarcity. Number one, we can constitute employee value propositions. What I mean by that is that thinking beyond just compensation and incentives, we need to have a career path for our associates, and we need to make sure that they are constantly being reinforced in terms of the value that they're providing to the organization, and particularly today as it relates to the customer. So as we think of this end-to-end supply chain, everything that we should be doing is based on the end demand of the customer, because at the end of the day, the customer is who is paying the bills, right? They're keeping the organization going and sustainable. The second thing that we can do is map our future focused needs. And this is an interesting one. So I might pause here and ask if anybody wants to weigh in, but if you're in a supply chain role, say a direct line role today, in your future talent strategy, do you have the role, whether it's internally provided or externally provided, of a data scientist in your talent map? Anybody on the line here? I'll ask Jessica if anybody raises their hand or makes a comment. They may have a talent scientist, a data scientist in their organization structure, either today or planned for the future. We get any responses, Jessica?
We did. We have Amy. Amy raised her hand. Amy's at Advanced Auto, and Roderick from Newell Company. Okay,
great. So good. Well, good for you. And so I would say that if you think about the talent map of the future, compared to the talent map of the past, if you don't have a data scientist somewhere built into your organization, you're at some point going to be left behind between what is traditional and leading edge. Database decisions today are de rigueur. We have to be doing that. And we have to have those data scientists built in. And more importantly, when we get to strategy 4, we have to invest in broadly in the organization in developing data science as a skill function within the supply chain organization. On number 3, we talk about focusing on retention. Yes, turnover rates are higher in younger generations. That is true, but if organizations do the right thing, they can significantly reduce those the voluntary turnover rates. So focus on retention is key. And going back to what I said earlier, strategy number 1 and strategy number 4 basically are 2 of the key elements. The third one being making sure that we have good leadership leading these people. If we can do that, we can definitely address that. So number 4 comes down to investing in talent leadership development. This is all of the kind of development that we do. We're not just talking about internal development here. We're talking about external development. We're talking about various kinds of learning platforms. We're talking about creating the environment of the lifelong learner. And I think universities today, I know Penn State is for certain, and as well as some of our peer institutions, are starting to create this mindset with the students that we put out there. But in an organization, certainly in a large organization, the percentage of those with a college degree or higher is still relatively small. There's still a lot of skilled and semi-skilled talent in organizations, and so we need to develop broadly across the organization. If you're a manufacturing company, and some of you probably are, a significant percentage of your shop floor folks are not going to be college educated. They might have an associate's degree or went to a technical school, or maybe they're high school graduates, or maybe not, or maybe they came out of the military and are working towards a degree or some other advanced learning. So we have to invest in all talent, and we also need to invest in leadership, leadership from the supervisor level on up. And I'm going to talk about this on the next slide. And the last thing here is we need to create a talent pipeline. And the talent pipeline is, you could broadly take the approach is that if we have a position, we're going to go recruit externally and we're going to poach somebody from a competitive organization. But that's becoming increasingly difficult. And you'll see a higher percentage of turnover of people, particularly amongst the Gen Y and Gen X generations that came from one organization to another. If they are not immediately satisfied, they will turn over again. And so you end up with this sort of 2-3 year turnover pipeline. We also need to start earlier. We also need to think differently. Like, are you recruiting from, say, ex-military coming out of active duty? Great pool for talent. Do you have the appropriate strategies in place to recruit a diverse workforce? And when I say diverse, I'm talking not just about the underserved populations, but women. It's particularly pleasant to see at Penn State, at least in our supply chain information systems program, that our percentage of women students is about the same as the general population, 52-48. But our underserved populations are still low, and that is probably true in your organization as well. So is there an effort there? So there's a lot of different things that we need to do to kind of broaden and deepen that talent pipeline pool. So if I can go into strategy 4 a little bit deeper here on the next slide. So here's some myths. Yeah, you're right. That's next slide. Here's some myths about talent development. And I'm not going to talk to each and one of these, but the one thing that I will say is I really want to talk about the last one specifically, is that it's not a best practice to have all your talent development internal, nor is it a best practice to have all of your talent development external. It's really a combination. And when I say combination, I want you to think of it this way. Organizations like Penn State or our peer schools or CorpU and their university partners can teach what I call is called common knowledge. So we can do all the research, We can structure all the learning, and we can apply it generically into what is best practice, what fits, what does the research show that works. And every business management book that you've read of any substance is going to be written that way. They're going to give you lots and lots of examples and say, here's the best practice. But only your organization has the tribal knowledge. So you have to tweak that common knowledge to be internalized to make it work for your own firm. So whether you're, and I don't know who's on the line today, but whether you're working for Dell or ExxonMobil or Kennametal or Boston Scientific or Agilent, who's a partner with us with CorpU or others, each of your businesses is going to have its own unique characteristics and unique way, or Department of Defense, you're going to have your own unique characteristics, and only you have the subject matter expertise to train and educate on that tribal knowledge. And more importantly, in today's environment, where with the aging workforce, where you see a significant percentage of turnover amongst those SMEs coming in the next 3 to 15 years, as the younger generation replaces them, that knowledge transfer is going to be critical. So what I really want to emphasize here is that, and by the way, this research is based on work done at the University of Tennessee. You can look up the article if you want. But if you, what I really want to emphasize here is that there is no cookie cutter approach. You really have to apply external common knowledge to help foster your innovation, and you have to apply internal tribal knowledge to make sure that it applies specifically to your business. Do we have any? I'm going to pause there for a second. Yeah, if there are any questions or comments.
Yeah, so I have a couple, and I thought this would be a good point to jump in before we move on to theme 2. And one that came in is going back a slide. You talked about data scientists, and the question is, what are the skill requirements for others to become data savvy, for leaders and other supply chain professionals? In other words, the non-data scientists was the question.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of skills. First of all, I would start with an understanding of visualization of data. So how do I take data, which can, a colleague of mine used to refer to it, looks like ants on a page. How do I take significant amounts of data and visualize it in a way that I can quickly get actionable insights from that? So data visualization is one, and there are tools out there for that to do it. Number 2 is data analytics. Now you could get very advanced and learn things like MATLAB or R or Python or other tools that can analyze the data and build models and around that, if you want to invest in that. Otherwise, there are sort of simpler ways to do it. I mean, you can do lots of cool things with Excel and other stuff, and there are simpler ones. So data visualization, the ability to perform analytics. But I think the really important critical feature is, and particularly for leadership, is how do I draw actionable insights from the data? So if I visualize the data or I analyze the data and it provides outputs, okay, and this is the fallacy with artificial intelligence, machine learning, and other things. I can create an optimization model, put all the variables in that I know about, and come up with a solution. But how do I know as a business leader that that solution is the right one for my organization, my unit, my firm? I still have to be able to I have to analyze the data, meaning using my expertise to come up with actionable insights. And even if I knew that that was the optimal solution, how do I get from where I am now to there, right? A machine learning or artificial intelligence tool can't teach that. So it's really about visualization, analytics, and making actionable insights from data.
Yeah, thank you. I think that that was a very helpful answer. And then just another quick question about any thoughts on when you mentioned diversity. Stephen said, what about older adults? We have to include older adults that have great skills and so on. Any thoughts on that?
I agree. I think anybody who is willing and capable and able to work, and is willing and capable to learn, is a potential employee. Now, obviously, you can't employ anybody, excuse me, I don't know what it is, say under the age of 16 or 18, I'm not sure what it is. You know, and in certain areas that's always a question, right? Particularly in emerging markets. But I say starting with the high school age, all the way through what would be the traditional retirement age. But there are also areas, and I've seen some really innovative things. There's an organization, gosh, I can't remember their name off the top of my head, that is working with people coming who were formerly incarcerated. That is a seriously underserved market. Of course, it is also a highly diverse market for a lot of reasons, which I won't get into the politics of. And through some skill development and also through some mentoring and other things that they're doing, they are getting people who were formerly incarcerated, sometimes for even minor offenses, right? If you have anything on your history today, it's difficult for firms to hire you. This organization is working with those people to not rehabilitate them, but get them back into the workforce, mentor them, provide them resources and services. And what they're finding is that they're actually getting better employee attendance, better worker productivity, and better retention from that group than they do from their broader audience group. So if whatever pool is being underserved today, and I'll give you a different corollary, in the trucking market, there really is a push and an effort, and I don't know that it's succeeding yet or whatever, to get more women into trucking. Today, women truck drivers are only somewhere between 4 and 6% of the market, and yet we have a worldwide trucker shortage. So, and it's particularly problematic in the West. So, firms that are not focusing on getting women into their workforce as truck drivers are missing the boat, because it's an untapped market today.
Yeah, those are great comments. The only thing I'll add to this is I've been delightfully surprised by a number of people from really large organizations that are top supply chain, where people are moving into retirement, and they've done our Supply Chain Leadership Academy, and as they're moving in, they've reached out to some of our folks at CorpU and to me directly to say, what can I do? I have a passion for learning, I have a passion for leadership, and I've spent 30 years in supply chain, and I'm going to retire, but I want to do something. And I think that's something that we're going to see. We at CorpU are going to find ways to tap into that for extra coaching and mentoring and moderators and so on in the programs.
Yeah, and I guess the last comment on that group is that I think you see more and more of those people move into the gig economy, where they're semi-retired, right? So
yep.
And so they've moved into a different, more of a part-time role, and as long as companies can embrace that, that's another talent pool they can tap into with a lot of subject matter expertise.
Yep.
Okay,
yep,
so that's
totally
theme
agree.
one.
All right, thanks. I think we got it.
Yep. Yeah, let's talk about theme two, and then we'll pause again. So theme two is market speed, and here I don't really have any slides. I just want to talk to this particular one. So here there are three things that are going on that I think are both blessings and curses. So one is e-commerce and the Amazon effect. Of course, we are very well aware as consumers about Amazon and their the larger company in that space, Alibaba, right? So everybody is well aware of those. But what the percentage of e-commerce, particularly in the West, on the consumer side, is still relatively small. Somewhere around 9%, probably getting closer to 10%, growing at about 10% a year. And it'll continue to grow. Some economists predict that it'll top out at between 20 and 25%. I believe that's probably an accurate prediction, and that'll be well, relatively far into the future if you consider that it's only 9% today, growing at 10% a year. You can do the math and figure out how long that's going to take. Where the bigger impact of this is coming is on the B2B markets. So today, in business to business, e-commerce is a larger percentage. It's closer to 13%, and I'm excluding things like EDI transactions here. It's also growing faster. And in comparative dollars, I think the only dollars I'm really familiar with are from 2017. Business to consumer in the United States was about $500–600 billion. B2B was about $1.3 trillion. So this whole e-commerce and Amazon effect is, and this is going to tie into the third one, which is the advanced procurement practices and technologies. What this is doing is it's allowing buyers and sellers to make all of the information for the purchase decision public. And you know you do this, right? If you're going to buy something, particularly something of significant value, you're going to shop on the internet, do all the comparisons between specifications and everything else, and then you're going to theoretically make your purchase choice on the fulfillment methodology that has the most value for you. And that may be the lowest price in certain circumstances, or it may be the most convenient, or the one with the best augmented or value-added services. But you're making that, what I call economic decision, using real data that's available to you, where you can compare competitors in real time. And this has a bigger impact on business to business than it does on business to consumer. And it's created an inordinate amount of margin pressure. Number one is because it allows prices to be compared on a commodity basis. And number two, it also puts a lot of margin pressure on, because it's a higher cost of fulfillment than the traditional methods. So companies are having to deal with this, and that's number one. And there's a variety of different. We don't have enough time on this call to talk about the different strategies here. On the labor scarcity side, it's a little easier to break it down. But that's one big effect that you need to be considering in terms of how you're designing your supply chain, is how does e-commerce, both now and in the foreseeable future, I talk about the next 3 to 5 years, how does it impact my business, and what do I need to do differently? The second big impact here on the market speed is SKU proliferation. By some estimates, Amazon has north of 350 million SKUs. And for those of you who are on the line, you're probably looking at your own firm and saying, wow, I thought we had a lot with 10,000 or 15,000 or 30,000 or 300,000. 350 million SKUs and growing every day. But everybody is seeing a growth in their SKU base. And SKU growth, for those of you not familiar with that term, stock keeping unit, creates a level of complexity. And it requires us to think about things like inventory in a different way. So Alan and I were talking earlier broadly about things like make to order and make to stock and make one time. But as the SKU base gets bigger, we need to think about how to sunset SKUs, how to manage SKUs, how to think more thoughtfully. And this is also an area that, unfortunately, on the supply chain side is under-researched. So there's not a lot of good research out there on optimization models, on how do you decide whether or not you should add a SKU or delete a SKU. And so SKU growth is sort of uncontained at this point. And that's another challenge for organizations. The last one, again, kind of blessing and a curse, is this advanced procurement practices and technologies. So for those firms who have been adopting these advanced procurement practices and technologies, they're doing it with the purpose of saying, hey, look, I can be more efficient, I can be better, I can lower my cost of procurement. And I'm going to get X% of cost reduction from my supply base because I'm adopting these advanced procurement practices. And that can, in fact, be true, but think about it the flip side around. So we talked about the end-to-end model. Aren't your customers doing the same thing with you? So what these practices are doing, and I'm not suggesting they're bad practices in any way, what they're doing is, again, like the e-commerce change, is that they're allowing everything to be commoditized. So we have to think about, how do we represent our products and services to the customers in a different way? Otherwise, and how do we evaluate our suppliers in a different way and not just look at the lowest cost per unit procured? So on the procurement side, we need to think more holistically, like buying the best value of product and services from our suppliers, not just the lowest price. And how do we apply things like total cost of ownership, not just lowest landed cost? And from the customer's perspective is, how do we communicate those value-added services in an appropriate way so that our products are not commoditized when being compared to our competitors? So let me stop there and see if there are any questions on this particular theme.
You have any questions? Pop them in. All right, why don't we keep going? Steve, and
Okay.
we'll wait because I don't have any immediately coming in, but I want to be mindful of time. We want to keep
Great.
sprinting.
All right. So let's go through these next couple slides quickly. So you can jump to the next slide. So emerging technologies. So emerging technologies broadly fall into these three categories. This is from our own research: mobility, digitization, automation. And let's unpack this a little bit, Alan. If you could kind of jump forward here a little bit. So on mobility, this is all enabled by the cloud. So this is the ability to process data anywhere, anytime, using things like the cloud, obviously communication devices like Wi-Fi, internet, other types of mobile technologies, and then finally, the ability to have smart devices that can do things like edge computing. So where, or having devices that are tethered to the internet or some other way back through the cloud to applications. So the first big area of technology is mobility. The second one is digitization. We can think of digitization, and of course, we all talk a lot about machine learning and artificial intelligence, right? Which is becoming more common. Again, this is enabled by cloud computing, right? And other applications of this on the digitization side, obviously I'm not touching on them all, are things like additive manufacturing or what we colloquially call industrial 3D printing. So, and then the last area in this is augmented reality. So digitization refers to the ability to use digital data, right? And this does not have to be structured data. It could be unstructured or streaming data, but to use data, okay, to create actionable insights, right? Or to perform functions. The last area, which is the next slide, okay, is automation, okay? Now these IIoT devices, as you see on the right-hand side of the screen, these are these devices that are tethered typically via the internet to some, now they could have edge computing capability where they can do the processing themselves. And we see this on things like drones and other autonomous vehicles, or they could be tethered back to a central center that collects the data, processes the data, visualizes the data, and provides actual insights. Intelligent robotics are becoming more commonplace because the cost of robotics is becoming cheaper. I point out here that industrial robots have been around for over 50 years, as have many of these technologies, by the way. Machine learning, at least the math around it, is more than 100 years old, right? So, we often get excited about these technologies, but they don't move as quickly as we think. And then lastly, it's this machine-to-machine communication. And again, this is where you have devices tethered to one another to perform certain activities. And we could think of, I don't know, you can think of the conveyor systems in a warehouse or something like that are operating very complex systems. Kiva robots moving around inside of a warehouse, all this other kind of stuff. So those are the three broad themes around technology. If we could jump ahead, Alan, I think we're getting close.
Can I ask you a question on that one, Steve? And I think we're good on time because I think it was really helpful to get questions as we're going along. And on the theme on technology, the one that has come up over and over that we keep hearing is around like robots replacing humans in the factories. And we've had customers. I heard an interesting customer talking about cobots and making a promise about no one left behind and what they're doing to create that future. I'm wondering if you have thoughts on, I mean, you're seeing what companies are doing. What are the progressive exemplar organizations doing in terms of humans and machines and optimizing this theme? I think it's a critical issue that people are really, really scared about, fearful, half the world, and the other half is sort of energized by. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's unavoidable. And I say, again, what was the first slide I put up? Labor scarcity. If you can't get people, right, and jobs are becoming infinitely more complex, what intelligent robots are doing are replacing, for the most part, raw and semi-skilled labor, but there are fewer and fewer of people to do raw and semi-skilled labor, right? So I think you and I, Alan, are close to the same age. I might be a little bit older than you, but if I think back when I went to college, right, the percentage of people with a college degree was about 30% lower than it is today, right? And even though it's still under 30%, I think it was 20% back then. Today it's about 29%. That with a smaller population in the workforce, because even though the population has grown, the demographics have shown that it shifted from younger people to older people, right? And you were talking earlier about hiring people above the traditional age of retirement into the workforce. Well, you're not going to hire them into a 8-10 hour a day shop floor job, right? You're going to hire them something, and these people have a lot of experience. So again, it's a fallacy to think that we are going to replace labor, okay, and grow the economy, right? They have to be enabled by, and this argument has gone on for hundreds of years, right? When the first industrial revolution came, right, everybody was worried that, oh, we're going to replace all the jobs, right? And when the first industrialization came of farmers, what are we going to do with all the farmers, right? And I'm sure truck drivers, I'm sure the conversation today is going to be, when trucks become autonomous, what are we going to do with all the truck drivers?
Well, that's a big conversation. That's one that people write about like every week.
It is, and
you're thinking that's the Luddites.
Yeah, well, there are always people, and this is unfortunate. There are always people that I call that are on the bubble, right? So let's say, for example, let's say that you are a truck driver today who is in his or her late 30s, early 40s, okay? And I'm using that example very specifically. Is there a time in the foreseeable future, because the average truck driver today on the road, I believe, is well into his or her 50s. So if you have potentially another 20 years of work, okay, is it foreseeable that at some point in that 20 years in the future that your job is going to be replaced by an autonomous vehicle? Yes, of course it is. But if you're the average truck driver today who's in his or her 50s, autonomous vehicles are not going to replace your job. They're not going to. It's a fallacy to think that that's going to happen. So the people that are on the bubble, okay, are going to be economically impacted. And this is a role for government to play. This is not a role that can be fixed by private business, right? Government has to say, look, for this segment of the workforce that's going to be impacted, I need to provide gap insurance. I need to provide training. I need to provide education. I need to provide something for that person to do for the balance of his or her career. But that is a relatively small percentage of the workforce. And it's very targeted at specific things as these technologies develop. So no, I do not believe that robotics are going to be a detriment to society, and we're going to have a lot of people with nothing to do. Not certainly for my business career. I don't believe that at all.
Yep, got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Helpful.
Yep.
Ready to move on to the new normal?
I am. So this goes back to the earlier question, I think, about data science, right? So the new normal is technology-driven supply chain. So we need to think about mobile and complexity, which comes back to what I was saying earlier about how do you, excuse me, how do you visualize data? How do you collect and analyze data? And how do I make actionable insights from data? So this goes back to the talent question about creating this data-driven workforce that is making decisions with data as an enablement and not data as a problem to think about. And then the last comment I'll make here is, if you jump to the next slide, please, is that we also need to think about, as we're looking at technology, is there are so many technologies out there and there are so many choices, okay? We have to be careful and make sure that we are investing at the right times and appropriately, okay? And we're also thinking about how all of this impacts the customer, right? Because we want to create this, as I put in the right side of the slide, a frictionless customer experience, right? If we're simply applying technology for technology's sake, and more importantly, if we're not advancing the people and process and technology in that order, we're going to end up with what I refer to as the 5-year-old in a Ferrari problem. So we go out and we buy a Ferrari, and then we put a 5-year-old in to drive it, okay? And it looks nice sitting on the curb, but it doesn't go anywhere, and it certainly doesn't go very fast. So we have to think about technology, and there are so many choices out there, is what I'm doing enhancing the customer experience? And am I willing to fail at a certain technology and quickly adapt, which goes back to your earlier comment about that I refer to as organizational inertia. You have to have a different mindset about being willing to take chances and risks, let things fail, and then finding the next strategy and moving on to that. And then the last slide, I just want to point this out because I mentioned this earlier. It goes back to the next slide here, Alan. This is some Gartner information about the hype cycle for emerging technologies. So, and you could assign whatever timeline you want to this, but typically innovation comes out and there's this innovation trigger, and you can see all these really cool things that are, and then it goes through the peak of the peak of inflated expectations. And I point out blockchain here because I think that's where blockchain is right now. And then it goes through this trough of disillusionment. And what you see is when you look to the right, you see that some of these technologies have been around for more than 10 years, most of them 5 to 10 years, and yet they are not widely adopted. So I come back to my earlier thing about the autonomous driving. I had a young person in a class a couple of weeks ago, and they said to me, well, Elon Musk said in the next 3 to 5 years, all vehicles on the road will be autonomous. I said, okay, let's unpack that comment. Number one is there isn't a single autonomous vehicle on the road, okay, that you can buy today that operates independently. Not a single one, okay? There are some in certain military applications and on some mining sites, okay? Number two, the average age of a car in the United States, I believe, is between 13 and 15 years. So what you're telling me is that there's a technology that is not technology readiness level 9 right now that is going to go through the development, be rolled out, and going to replace the entire inventory of all vehicles that equal 15 years of vehicles in the next 3 to 5 years. If that's the case, I should invest all my money in the car business because I'll be rich, right? So for a lot of these things, they go through this cycle. Gartner's done this research over and over again. And all I say about this is that, yes, you should get excited about technology, but do not expect technology to be your savior, okay? It still comes back to the basics of business: people, process, and technology, and focus on the business activities. And use technology as an enabler, not as a technology as a savior.
So a question that is rolling around is, you've mentioned customer experience and speed and using technology, and obviously you make a great point. Technology, even a Ferrari, it's not worth it it doesn't do much for you if you don't know how to use it. But the question was about customer experience, and what I'm wondering is if you look at this customer experience and delivering them anything they want, whenever and faster, what is the role? How do you get people, or what do you see people doing in terms of this idea of collaborating with sales, marketing, support? How important are those things, and how have they changed the business of supply chain, where it was to where it's going?
Well, if you go back to if you think back to the slide where I talked about the market speed question, so sales and marketing takes on a different role, right? So now it's about, right, if I think in an e-commerce setting, and I think in these advanced procurement strategies, is how do I compact all of the necessary information for a customer, whether it's a B2B customer or B2C customer, to make an intelligent choice and to accurately evaluate my company's product and services. And I want to emphasize that, my company's product and services fairly and adequately, and not just based on the lowest price, right? So I think more and more we're getting closer to what I call, what economics has said was true, but marketing said isn't true, was that consumers or customers will make the optimal choice if they have all the data. Well, as more and more data is becoming available to customers, so now sales and marketing has to be able to convey all of the valuable information to the customer whether that customer is a B2B customer, in a way that it can be unpacked, analyzed, and they can take actionable insights and make the right choice. And then you need to think about, am I providing the best value to the customer, right? So is this going to have an impact on things like brands? And I think the answer is yes. I think we're already seeing that because you see this proliferation of micro brands, right? All these little brands popping up, and they're gnawing away at the major brands, right? Because they're taking all these little market niches away, and they're doing a great job of communicating. You want to buy this product because, I don't know, what's the latest one I saw on TV? It's a milk that we took a certain protein out of because it's going to make your digestive system operate, right? I mean, that is a very market niche product. So I think marketing and sales, it's going to change to be more of data presentation than traditional than a traditional selling approach.
All right, I think we're going to end on that one. That was
it's a fun question.
Helpful.
It's a fun question to talk about.
Yeah, it really is. So, Steve, I want to thank you for giving us your time and spending the hour with us today. Thank you all for coming to this Smarter Growth webinar series today. I hope everybody found this to be a great event. I hope everybody had a great Memorial Day for those that are in the United States, and we're off to a great summer. So thanks again, Steve Tracy from Penn State Center for Supply Chain Research, the Executive Director, and the brains behind our CorpU Penn State Supply Chain Leadership Academy. Thanks again, Steve. Have a great day.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.